Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hopefully you guys are doing well. Thanks for joining. We are on the Cox and Sub, and I wanted to make a video here about another easy setup for signaling systems in Trainz. This one specifically is going to be about setting up CTC. Now, I've made a couple of videos on this route here and there with brief parts where we talk about APB specifically, but this one is going to be all about CTC. I do have the detail turned way down, so I do apologize right now for things not looking super great. You know, there is Turfex, the track is sunk into the ground, and all that goes away when you turn down the details. So please excuse all of that, but that's all right. We're focusing on the important parts, and that is CTC. So the thing with CTC, if you want it to work well in Trainz, there are some limitations that you don't have in the real world, and that's of course normal for any signaling setup within a game. There's always going to be just a few restrictions. So as an example, in Trainz, if you really want this to work, you need basically blocks, and those blocks more or less need to exist from one passing siding to another. So that is the Fulton Co-op, and then you have about 3.5 miles here till you get to the next passing siding, which is Luton. And that's because Luton is the next town just south of here. There's Luton right there. But in Trainz, you're going to need the passing siding, and then you're going to need some space between them. And that space between those passing sidings needs to be reasonable enough. You know, if you're building a route that's not like a model railroad, you want it to be considerably longer than the actual sidings themselves. Because the thing about railroads is if your passing sidings start getting way too close because your traffic volume is so high, it eventually gets to a point where it just becomes more beneficial to just double track it. But here we have roughly 3 miles. That's about the least I do typically between sidings. The longest I think I have is around 7 miles. But here are the basics that you need. You can use any set of signals you like. I like to use the ones from JR. I don't really use the ones that are called JMR on the download station. They're great signals, I just haven't learned how to use them. So these are the SafeTran signals, but what I'm going to show you today will work just as well with searchlight signals or the G-style tri-lights. What else do we have out there that they could work with? Oh, and then even the semaphores from JR that mostly works for those as well. The semaphores have a few restrictions, but as is typical, you've got your 06 signal. So this is an 06. RD stands for right diverge. You don't really have to use the RD LD, but you know, it helps when you do, so I use it. You also need an 04 signal. So these are 04s. Remember, on an 04, the train will stop. It will not pass the signal if it is red. You need an 04. You don't need these ladders, but I do have those. I got those off the download station, but those are JMR SafeTran ladders. They really only fit the SafeTran signals, but I love them, so I have them. You also need, You also need an 05 signal. So here I have just the head of an 05. That's because I'm mounting it to the mast for a different signal. And then you also need an 06D. 06D just represents distance, or in this case for SafeTran, it's called 06 intermediate distant. Now there are some differences in the 06 intermediate distant versus the just 06. As an example, if I go to properties for the 06 intermediate distant, it has these 4 options. There's no option for junctions. That's because this signal is not for protecting junctions. This is a signal for giving you a heads up of what the next signal is going to show you. So you want to use these 2-headed 06 distance signals right before you have an 06 2-headed signal. And this is good for giving you like approach mediums, medium approach mediums, approach restricting clear, you know, limited signals, those kinds of things. I'm not going to go into all those kinds of super details on this video. We can save that for later. But to get a basic CTC system going that will help you get traffic movement, you want to have this 06 distance signal come up before you get to the 06. So here's the 06. We'll look at that one. Here's the junction. Green means straight, so it's a diverge to the right. You can add more to that if you need to. I can talk more about that in detail here in a moment. And then here are a few settings. We'll just quickly go through these. If you do diverging route is unbonded, it will not read the occupancy here. It will just assume it's occupied, and it will give you a restricting signal. If you look closely at my other videos, I do have plenty of times where this is done, especially when I'm doing APB or ABS signaling systems. For CTC, I don't do this if it's a control point like a siding. I never do this. All right, you want it to read the occupancy so it can tell you if that siding is clear or not. That is a key feature of most CTC systems. Limited speed is all about just that, limited speed. I think limited speed is 45 miles an hour in game. So that will restrict the speed on the turnout on the diverging route to 45 miles an hour. Mine is always lower than that anyways, so I never use that. Show advanced approach is useful, especially if you have a train that's going to be cleared through. I am going back through and adding this to all of my mainline CTC signals. Once you click this, you can choose if it's a single flashing head, like if it were out in the middle of nowhere on a single head signal, or you can do what I do, which is don't check that box, and then it's 2 yellows, which is what I like on a 2-headed signal. It's just me personally. Approach lit just means that it will not be lit until the train's coming. I am actually also going through and turning that on as well. And then operate in automatic when idle. I personally leave this off if it's a CTC system I'm setting up, but essentially this will just read the signal or the block in front of it all the time if you have it checked. And so that's how we get this signal. But if you turn it to approach lit, it doesn't show. There are benefits to having it do this even in CTC, but I personally don't mess with it because it's always reading 4 blocks ahead of the train anyways. It's not usually a problem. But yeah, that's setting up an 06 signal. Now for your 04s, of course, they just stand guard. You need one on the siding and on the main facing away or out of the control point. So the 06 guards the trains coming into the control point. The 04 guards the trains going out of the control point. All right, then these are the only 3 settings for 04s. Nothing too crazy there. And then on the other end of the control point, it's the exact same setup. All right, but here is the key. Between control points, you want to have 05 signals. Those are the intermediate signals that the train can pass if it's red. So here's 04s. There's our 06. But you don't want to put a 05 right here. We do that for APB systems, but we don't do that for CTC systems. Instead, we give some space before we get to the next 05. Now this section doesn't have an 05 because it's way too close to the next protected switch. This isn't quite a control point. It's not long enough, but it is a passing siding for the local, and it is CTC controlled. So it wasn't far enough to get an 05. Let's go up here a little bit further where we can see an 05. Same thing here because there's a junction to go to the branch line for the mine. Let's see, here we go, good. So here's 2 05s facing opposite directions. So you need this just, out in the middle between 2 control points. And the 05 signal, about the only thing I do is just show advanced, and of course I'll eventually change them to say approach lit. All right, but the purpose of this signal is just to keep the trains moving. If it shows a red, the train will stop and then we'll proceed after that at restricted speed. So this will not hold a train permanently, but that's exactly what you want between all the control points. The reason for that, if a control point is in front of you is cleared, or if a train is cleared into this block, all of these will show red, and once the block is occupied, if it's occupied by a train coming against you, the previous control point, the previous 04 signal back there, will not let you out of the control point. It does give that protection, which is exactly what you want with CTC. Now, in a bit of fairness, when it comes to telling a train where to go, you still, yourself, if you're doing AI, you still need track marks at the end of your siding and your main to tell your train where you want them to go. You need it at both ends of the control point. So if I get to where we can see the names here, this one is CP for control point, Riverside North main, control point, Riverside North siding. Okay. On the other side of the control point, that's Railroad North, by the way. On the other side of the control point is South siding and South main. All right. There's the 04 signals. There's the 06. Even though I'm using a signal bridge over here, it's still the same signals. Those are 04s. This is an 06. All right. I do have this 06, however, set to show restricting, because while this track right here is covered by a signal, in real life it would not show restricting for that one. It would show a signal indication. However, in the game, this is a compromise that you have to make. Since I have the other path does not have a signal and is not covered by CTC protection, I've got to have it show restricting. So in the game, if you check this box, it will show restricting for all diverging routes, even though in the real world it doesn't have to do that. But that's a compromise you have to make. All right. Your only other option to fix that is to throw a little signal right here, but that's not really prototypical. It doesn't look great, so I typically don't do that. I just make the compromise of dealing with the restricted. In a bit of fairness, my freight trains never go over 30 or 40 anyways, and so taking the switch at 15 is actually pretty reasonable and prototypical for the most part. But yeah, that's how we get it set up. Now, very quick, I did have a few questions about how do you know how far to put them. Typically, good rule of thumb, if you can, you want them to be about as far apart as your typical train length. Now, in this case, mine are way closer than that, but that's because I have a high frequency railroad. I have a lot of trains moving at any point in time. And so the closer your signals are after one another, the closer you can run your trains together, which means the less time you have to wait for an opposing meet. And so me personally, I like to try to stack trains up and get them moving. And so I have way too many signals intermediate, in between control points, way too many. Too close together, too frequently. So I do acknowledge that on this route. I do have another route though that I've worked on for years that I'm not ever going to release. It uses a bunch of payware, but on that one I go about 2 to 2.5 miles between even intermediate signals, more like the prototype. This here is maybe maybe 2,000 feet. So, but that's because I run commuter passenger trains here, and I want them to be able to move quickly, and to be able to get a shorter distance between them and the train in front of them. So, all right, one last thing to show. You can make some pretty complex arrangements. For example, this signal is protecting not just the crossover into the siding, but also the crossover into the yard. This is one where I broke the rule I mentioned earlier, and I did actually add a second signal. So this one here, it is not unbonded. It does only show one crossover, but if I were to have deleted this signal, then I would have put this to unbonded, and I would have needed to add another switch behind it to represent this diverge right here. That way, if it goes the first one but then straight, it's going to show a different signal indication than if it goes the first one and then diverges again. All right, but yeah, anyways, that is how we have this one set up, and then this one is set to show diverging, or is unbonded. That way, if I do have it thrown this direction, then it will show restricted, which means this signal will show approach restricted, which is not very far. So, a smart engineer, knowing his territory, would know that if he's going to come into hybrid yard, he's going to need to be slow before he gets to this signal, even if the signal gives him a good indication. So that's where experience comes into play. And then just a cool detail on this particular route, if you see an automatic switch like this, that means the dispatcher controls that one. So if you're a local crew and you want to be more prototypical, you can't throw that switch without permission. But then if you do have a ground throw, you can throw that one. So notice, the dispatcher can line you into the siding, but you have to come up here and line yourself into the yard. Very prototypical in certain situations. And then, of course, really busy yards like Barstow or Mojave or, these other places, Colton or West Colton, wherever they have these really busy yards. Of course, the dispatcher can route you right into the RD tracks himself, or herself. But yeah, there we go. That was a very brief overview of setting up CTC. You need 04s, 05s, 06s, and 06Ds, which is the distance signal. And from there, it really comes with time. In the future, I'll make a video where I talk more in detail about some of these advanced features, like setting up complicated junctions, like this one, for example, because it's got to show all these different possibilities. That signal is clearing all the way to this track right here, to this switch. And so you had to program that. You had to program all the straights. I'll also have a video in the future where we talk about how to program switches that are going against you, because that messes with the indications. And I'll show you that in the future. Here I've already foolproofed all of them, so I definitely don't want to undo that work and then redo it. But I'll create those scenarios, you know, in the future for you guys to see. But thanks for watching. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. A little longer than usual, but you know, I wanted to go into some extra detail to try to help you guys get everything set up. So just got to finish up this part of town, get a few things polished back here, some background stuff, and then for the most part, the first 27 or 28 miles will be done all the way from Coxton all the way to Billary. So we've got Billary finished. It's releasable now, and then as soon as you cross over the bridge here, I've got to continue the detail from this part forward, so which I will. We'll make it up the hill. But notice, from CP North Billary, that's what, milepost 26 roughly? Did I not put milepost there? I didn't, did I? Oh yeah, because I've been doing those with signals. Yeah, sure enough. But if that's 27.4, then this is roughly 27. All the way up. What's this? 30? So yeah, that's almost 3 miles. Not bad. That's a tough CP right there. This is the hardest control point. It's a reasonably tight curve, and it's like a 0.8% grade. So, you know, for underpowered trains or steam engines, that's not very friendly. And that's after a long 3 miles of running up grade. So, you know, momentum is not working in your favor by that point. Anyways, I'll stop ranting. It's been fun. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys out there next time.